edition of Dr. Bickmore's Why Wednesday in Conversation. And today, my guest is Desmond Hall. Desmond, welcome to the conversation.
Thank you for having me, Steve. Appreciate it.
Oh, listen, it's great. We had a couple of kinks in getting our stuff together with illnesses and time changes
Oh,
and
man.
schedules, but here we are, ready to talk about your career as a writer and some of the things you did before you did this. First of all, one of the books we're going to talk quite a bit about today is Better Most Come. And one of the things I loved about this book was how the language you chose to use made me feel like I was in Jamaica. It made
Oh,
me feel like I was there because there were slang and other things that I don't think the reader has to say, oh, I'm imagining this is what kids really sound like and speak
mm,
like
mm.
Jamaica. So how much does that come out of you naturally, having come from there? And how much did you have to say, this is going to be easy for mainly American
Mhm.
audiences to grasp? How did
Right.
you play with that dialect?
What a great question to start with. So yeah, man, it come out of me, it's inside of me.
Yeah.
Uh, it's funny, when I was too young to know this, but I came to America several times and went back to Jamaica, then back and forth. It was mostly about trying to find a doctor who could cure my sister.
Oh,
Yeah, it was a tough thing, especially for my parents. But I was told, because I don't remember it, but I was told I wasn't supposed to speak at the Jamaican embassy, or else they wouldn't have given me a visa because my patois was so thick that, no one would understand what I was saying. And at that time, they really judged you on how you spoke and, how you
oh,
appeared and all of that. So, I that's just by way of saying how, things started. And I guess for the book, it was a heck of a process, actually. Even though I have, a grasp of patois, which isn't, one way of speaking across the island.
right.
In my area, St. James, is a different patois than, in Kingston, the capital city,
Yeah.
or in the middle of the country, or on the South Coast. There's just sort of different words and phrases and ways of speaking. And I thought of it, much like you thought, um, as something being really important to the setting. It
Yeah.
was the world building wouldn't be complete without the patois.
Yeah.
And but to figure it out took a lot. I went to in some of my writing groups, I'd go to friends who weren't Jamaican, and I'd ask them to read some stuff. And I could tell like they were being kind, like kind of nodding and going, "Yeah, I get that." But then I'd ask them questions and I'd figure out, well, it's not really coming across.
Yeah.
And so I tinkered with the level of patois, right? Because, in Jamaica, there's some patois could be spoken where I don't understand it, or
Right.
where other Jamaicans that live on island regularly don't understand it. So I had to find a level that was true to the dialect. And I say dialect as well as language, because right now there's a bill being bantied about in Jamaica to try to make patois the national language. And, I'm not really, I haven't caught, I have to talk to cousins to
Yeah.
find out about more about that. But, in terms of finding out what the right level was for the book, I thought of I went to Catholic school, high school,
Oh,
and I loved. And I remember being taught this argument about translation, and it was between Saint Augustine and Jerome in terms of how they wanted to interpret the Bible back in those times.
yeah.
And Jerome wanted an actual translation that would speak to the people and of the current day. And St. Augustine wanted the not touch a single word, comma, or anything. And I sort of side with Jerome because I think if you're reading something or having something read to you and you don't understand what's going on, I think it's a disservice to the text. So I don't really, I didn't really want to stay absolutely true to the text. I wanted to interpret it so that people who weren't Jamaican could understand the text as well. And I think, from the responses I've gotten from, family and friends who are Jamaican or of Jamaican descent, as well as like a lot of bloggers online, people get it and they feel, the patois. So I think, I've been, relatively successful in
Oh,
being true.
I thought you've danced a fine line. I think that it works really well because occasionally I say, okay, I'm reminding of the rhythm of these speakers and the language, and it's a constant reminder because sometimes you could read a lot of young adult fiction, for example, and forget what city you're in, which
Right.
in some cases the city might be really important, right?
Right.
But the
True.
author
True.
might lose that.
Yeah.
And sometimes they also want it to be generic. But I think in your case, with the story that's told and the drama between um, waiting for the barrels to come and what that
Right.
means and being on the island and having that double edge with the island is a place where people grow up regularly, but it's a place that has heavy influence from the money that comes through immigrants from the United States, plus
Yes.
issues of the drug trafficking. I think the constant reminder that you're in Jamaica as opposed to in New York or Atlanta or some
Right.
other place is really important to the novel, and I think it plays really well.
Oh,
I thought it was one of those ones that in my mind, I could see this filmed and
ah,
casting people who could capture a dialect that is going to be understandable, but also reminiscent of the place was really important. So
great. Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting, right? And there would be, if it were filmed, there'd be different ways to go. It could be a subtitled film where
right,
you just like let loose with the patois.
yeah, right,
And which given because it's also a very classist kind of thing,
yes,
like
yes,
people of different strata speak more of the Queen's English than they do of the patois,
yeah,
but though everyone can also drop into the patois when they want to. And and that's like of all Jamaicans. And that a lot of people don't know that there are so many Jamaicans who are Chinese, Indian,
right,
Jewish, German. It's a very, very mixed society in many
yeah.
ways.
Yeah, it's fascinating to deal with the idea of accents and who understands and who doesn't. And like you say, you could go to the interior and be lost for a while until you kind of catch up, right, with that.
Yeah.
It's that, at one time in my life I was a pretty fluent Spanish speaker. I don't
Oh,
speak as
wow.
much as I used to, but I had occasion once where I was assigned to go for a couple of years to a church congregation that was all in Spanish. And I thought, oh, okay, I can do this. Until I realized that the congregation was from Puerto Rico and the Dominican Republic and
Oh, right.
Mexico. And
Right.
all of a sudden I
Ah,
thought, okay, who am I talking to? Because my original Spanish was Argentine,
oh,
and I got pretty good with Mexican, but all of a sudden every rhythm and people that they they see you and you speak for a little bit and they think, oh, he's fluent. So they just come at you with their dialect and you think, all right,
right.
let's
Yeah.
back this up for a minute.
Yeah. Yeah. Slow it down a bit.
I gotta remember which dialect I'm listening to and where
Oh,
it's
yeah.
from. And I
Yeah.
so I was sympathetic to um the rhythms of language, right? Of,
Mhm.
of doing that. And I actually think that you catch on that there's a slight different rhythm between the way Deja does it and the way Gabriel does it.
Yes.
Gabriel's in a different community, right?
Mhm.
And some his friends and some of those things. There's just a tone of the way you create the characters that lets you know these two are from slightly different
Yeah.
groups,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
They're groups that understand each other, but they're groups
Mhm.
that might not want to cross over
Right.
necessarily. But
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's a big tension in the book too. So well
right.
said. Yeah.
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 So
It's
I captured that. Yeah, there were a lot of things that were really, really clever. So tell us a little bit about your origin as a writer, because you've done quite a few things. If people visit your website,
yeah.
you've done quite a few things over the years. So give us a little background about what you've done and why writing for adolescents has become important.
Wow. Well, so how far back do I
Oh,
go?
I don't. Go back where you think it's interesting, Desmond.
Okay. Well, I think a key moment for me was in as far as being wanting to be a writer was in high school. A teacher, a great English teacher, taught us all the novel The Jungle by Upton Sinclair.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
And I
Yeah.
never knew that a book could have that much power. It exposed and led to a lot of the issues with the meatpacking industry
Yeah.
in Chicago back in the middle of the last century, and led to congressional changes. And it really just stunned me. I didn't know that writing could be that powerful a thing, and I think that sparked something in me. And I went on to college to be a journalist. But a professor, I think my sophomore year, asked me and a buddy out for a couple beers. And he's like a major award-winning journalist. And we thought, oh wow, he thinks we're special. And it was the opposite. He thought, that journalism wasn't really for us. And I really respected him, and I thought about it for a while, and that sort of led me to being lost. Really, I didn't know what I was
Wow.
going to do. Yeah. And at that time, oh, my daughter just came in. Hi. um, at that time, there weren't many ways to make money if you lived on the eastern seaboard in America on your writing. So I delivered a pizza to a recruiter at an advertising agency, and she took mercy on me. God bless her soul. And she gave me a chance, and I stuck in advertising, trying to figure out how I could then become a writer.
Yeah.
And I wrote, several manuscripts. And back then, there was no email, so it was like the self-addressed stamped envelope.
Right. Right.
And thank goodness I had an office job, or else I would have gone broke buying envelopes. And so it didn't work out. So I was in advertising. I then, I think the big break for me was I got a job working with Spike Lee at
Mhm.
his agency. And there, my career in advertising really shot up, and I learned a lot from him. And but at the time, also, given the nature of the job, it allowed me time to do an independent film that I wrote and directed. That
Wow.
Yeah, and it was a comedy about race relations, and I don't know how that would play today, but
Well, yeah, right.
yeah.
It could be funny, but some of us are afraid to think it's funny anymore, right? Or
And this is like a big problem, right? I remember, for all my friends, of different shades and nationalities and ethnicities, we weren't as precious about, each other's opinions as we are, as, it seems to be today. And
yes.
I think that it's really important, this is sort of I digress a little, but I think part of, the writing for young people that's so important is to show them, like, have a little time and listen to what else someone has to say,
Yeah.
regardless of what you think about it, like hear them out before making the opinion. Or if you have the opinion, allow your opinion to like be on pause while you
Yeah,
listen to
take a
it.
rest for a minute. Well, I
Yeah.
think most young adult readers that read it all appreciate an honest approach to a subject.
Yeah.
because, when they hear adults, even adults that care about them a lot, tell them no or tell them they're wrong
Yeah.
more often than they want to hear it, right?
Yeah.
And in reality, they know that often they're wrong. They're trying to figure it out, right? So I
Right.
think they appreciate books that give honest presentations of characters, that show people who have some foibles and are trying to work through them, right? And
Right.
I,
Yes.
I
Yes.
think that that's important. And I think your novel does that at many levels. I mean, we can take the two main characters of Gabrielle and Deja, but I think Hammer also has
Yes.
issues that are going on.
Hmm.
There's the priest in the
Yes.
town that's the negotiator that I
Yeah.
think is walking a fine line, right?
Yes.
So
Very.
so I
Yeah.
think there's a lot of give and take about um like for me as an outsider, I've never been to Jamaica. I've certainly met people from Jamaica and and listened to my share of music. But as somebody who knows nothing about it, I felt like I was invited in to a community that was rich and understandable from the get-go. I mean, so
Oh,
again, I'm
great.
circling back to how great your book is, right? So there you are, because I think it does the very things you're talking about. Is it's honest and it's portrayal of characters, and you have to consider that not everybody's good just because they're from a fun place or
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you get your small film and you're working with Spike Lee, which has got to be a great thing, and
Yeah.
then you do that for a while, and what's next?
So my wife gets a job in Boston, and as my one of my oldest friends, a big Greek guy I used to play baseball with, he told me, Desmond, buddy, happy wife, happy life. So we moved to Boston and left, the beloved Brooklyn. And up here, I went to Grub Street. And, at the writing school there, they have a program called the Novel Incubator, which, just to get straight to the facts, they take 10 people every year, and roughly 3 out of the 10 get at least an agent or a book. And that's like incredible odds, right?
Right.
Because if you're out there on the street, it's got to be in the millions to one, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's very tough, and that's one of the reasons I like these interviews. Is I like hearing people's stories and what is their pathway, because most writers when they start are working another job or have another source of income that's helping them take this time to
Yes.
develop, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I needed that time badly. But, finally I'm here. Yeah, and then with Grub Street, I wrote my first novel, which was Your Corner Dark. But interestingly, it wasn't YA. It was actually adult. There are two adult voices and one teenage voice. But the agents, I sent the manuscript out, and the agents rejected it. But the great teacher there, Michelle Hoover, she told me, you know what? Reach out to those agents and ask them why they rejected it. And I was like, oh, you could do that? So, so I did. I emailed them, and a couple of them got back to me, and I found a commonality, which was they liked the teenage voice, but they didn't like the two adult voices. So I took some time to think it over, and I rewrote the book again, but from the teenager's point of view. And from that, I got two offers
Oh, wow.
from agents to represent. And, I ended up with Faye Bender, who is fantastic. And, she sold the first book, Your Corner Dark, to Caitlin DeLuey at Simon and Schuster, who is, a magnificent editor. I can't imagine a better one. I got really lucky there. And the first book, Your Corner Dark, got out there, and she made it actually a two-book deal. And Better Must Come was the second book in the deal. And ironically enough, I've always envisioned Better Must Come as a sort of a part two of Your Corner Dark.
Uh,
Yeah, but I won't mention. We could talk about the ending that isn't there,
oh.
that pulls that together. So there's no spoiler.
Yeah, well, maybe things don't need to be pulled together as tightly as we think they are sometimes, right?
Mm, right,
Books can follow on each other um, without necessarily being directly connected through a plot or a character. Sometimes setting or problems or drama
uh,
can make the connection, right?
right.
Um, that's very good. So when it was marketed, then did they market it young adult?
Yes,
Your Corner Dark was finally marketed as young adult, right?
yeah,
But
yeah.
did
It
they
was.
send you to any of the festivals or NCTE in that first time, or did they?
So it was during COVID.
Oh yeah,
So I didn't really get a chance to go anywhere other than my bedroom.
yeah.
And there were lots of Zoom. We were at Y'all West.
Y'all West. Okay, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. And yeah, I think that was, that one, and then, several others that I got a awesome opportunity to have be interviewed by Jason Reynolds, who's,
Oh,
a bit of an idol.
oh yeah. It's if you got interviewed by Jason, that's pretty good. Yeah.
Yeah, no, he's amazing. I love what he does. And I actually, I've written a lot because I kind of like, I really get into the technical part of the writing, the
Yeah.
plot structure, and I think maybe that's because my dad was an auto mechanic, and I feel like I'm kind of a Jamaican literary mechanic man.
All the parts must fit, huh?
Exactly, exactly, and different ways to sort of put them together. But yeah, so I kind of got into that, and we talked a great deal about the story structure and such. So, and the book was one of Bank Street's best of 2021, and it was like nominated in several different places. It was a Essence magazine, one of
Oh,
their
good.
19 young adult books. It was, nominated for the audiobook award, which, given what you said earlier with, the language, and some friends have also said this, that, in the audiobook, it just, if the actor was really great and his accents were really awesome and pretty accurate. So, it really brings the story to life.
Well, why don't you give us the elevator speech about why we should read Corner Dark? What's your synopsis of that? Because I think if people read this one, they're going to be interested in going back to what you've done. And you're not the only writer that suffered because a book came out in COVID, right? They get some good
Right.
reviews, but nobody kind of gets it in their hands. So
Yeah. Yeah.
what's the focus of your Corner Dark?
So it's about Frankie, who is a high school senior. He is just won the lottery ticket, which is a scholarship to study engineering at the University of Arizona. And he's a country boy. He lives in a one-bedroom house with his dad. He's, sort of heartbroken that his mom has died. And his family, a lot of his family his aunt and uncle are on the dubious side of things. They're in the
Yeah,
gang culture, in a posse, as it's called in
yeah.
Jamaica. And one day the father gets caught up, who is not in any of the gang violence, but he gets caught up and he's shot with a stray bullet at a party that Frankie was told not to go to.
Uh,
So, he feels massive amounts of guilt, and he then has to come up with quick money to get his dad some medical assistance, because medical assistance is expensive everywhere,
yeah,
but in Jamaica this kind of assistance is like unaffordable.
yeah.
So the only people he could go to is the aunt and uncle, and they're no nonsense people, and they demand that he join the posse as payment and to work off his time which will be forever because once you join a posse,
Yeah.
there's no leaving. And he gets the money to help his dad, but now he's stuck in a posse, and a lot of the book is him trying to get himself out of this jam with the help of his girlfriend, who is sort of an uptown girl,
Mm,
not the poor country boy that he is. So you
yeah.
get to see a lot of the classism and the colorism that is in Jamaica.
Yeah.
So yeah, and
And so we'll leave it there because then people have to find out if there's any hope, right? As they go,
yeah,
right? Well,
right.
and that leads us to um, Better Must Come. Give us
Mhm.
the introduction of Better Must Come. And I thought when I met you and you started talking about this book, and you were at one of the Allen meet and greets, the
Right,
Sunday night before Allen, and going to Allen is a great opportunity. When I meet writers that haven't been, I say, yeah, you need to start asking your publisher and other people, can you send me to Allen?
right.
You
Yeah.
you get to find a lot of people that love books. So
Mm.
tell us the the introduction to Better Must Come. And I got to tell you, there were a lot of really good surprises about a book that for me really moved along really well. So
Awesome. Well, great. Thank you. I love that. Love hearing that. So, Better Must Come is a story about Deja, who is a barrel girl. And in Jamaica, barrel children are kids who are left on their own or with family or friends of family while their parents go to, the countries like America or England or Canada, where they can make more money in like 3 years than they can in a decade working on the
yeah,
island. So Deja's left to sort of grow up very fast, as she has to look out for her younger siblings. She has to, be the mom, de facto mom for them, and as well as going to school and as well as working. And one day when she's out fishing, to get some money for the family, she comes across a go fast boat, which is notorious for use of that the drug dealers use.
yeah,
And there are many, like, Jamaica is one of the biggest places in the world for transshipment of drugs. It often
yeah,
comes down up from South America through Jamaica and then redistributed to, America or England and places like that.
yeah,
And Deja comes across this boat and hears someone on this boat who is suffering and is possibly dying. And she wonders, am I crazy for going there? But she's like, I have to help out, or else, I'm not that type of person to turn my back on someone. So she gets on that boat and she finds out that he's a DEA agent and he is indeed dying. And he gives her a briefcase filled with $500,000 and he tasks her to take it across the island to someone. And she's like, I can't do this. And before anything, he dies. And Deja has the case and this opportunity. And, she was also told that she'd be rewarded for this.
yeah.
And her mom is actually in trouble. The family needs money. So she considers doing it. And I don't know if I should go on with any more.
Oh, I think that's good because of course, she's got to do something, right?
Right.
And
Yeah.
so who do you, there's a lot of questions when you first talk about it. Who do you trust? Do you have the wherewithal to do it on your own? Right.
Right. Yeah.
Um, and how hard is it with all our other responsibilities to even physically get from A to B, right?
Right.
When you're a
Right.
kid,
Yes.
you that's just you're probably not gonna. I imagine in Jamaica, you wouldn't sit with a fancy briefcase on a bus and not have people staring at you.
Yeah, yeah,
You know?
yeah. And just the paranoia and the knowledge of having that much money on you, it's probably gonna like feel hot, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I remember the first time at 19 where I put together a bus trip with a buddy where, a bunch of fraternity kids went to the Penn Relays and we made something like $400 or something. And we put the money in, we went into the bushes to share out the money. And that money felt like, it weighed 10 tons.
Yeah.
Yeah. So imagining Deja with all that cash, yeah.
Yeah,
It's
it's really interesting because I think that one of the things that I kept thinking about in the back of my mind is the level at which kids who kind of innately know the difference between right and wrong,
Mhm.
but when you get an opportunity, how do you continue to navigate that right and wrong with all these pressures, right?
Right.
And
Right.
I think Gabriel's maybe a better example of that than
Mhm.
Deja in some ways.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, and that's one of the reasons I really like I'm going all the way back to E.M. Forster with the importance of side characters. I mean, this book doesn't
Right.
exist without Hammer kind of
Yeah. Yeah.
understanding that Gabriel has, um, that it's like the Goodwill Hunting moment where his buddy
Yeah.
says, "If you're still here in 10 decades, I'll shoot you myself." Right?
I love that moment.
Right.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and that's kind of what Hammer is saying to Gabriel. I'm here. I don't see a way for me to move, but you shouldn't be here, right?
Right.
You
Right.
need to be somewhere else, right? Um,
Yes.
and Hammer doesn't even understand the level to which these, Deja and Gabriel have this problem, and they're
No.
not quite sure, but he understands that maybe he has an opportunity to help in the right direction, right? So
Right.
I think there's a lot of play on this. To say it's just Deja's book is wrong, right? Because when I
Mhm.
read it, I
Right.
keep thinking, oh, okay, these characters from her siblings to her friends that initially, like, I love her friends because initially she thinks her friends are only interested in the shampoo they can get from Deja so their hair will shine.
Right.
But then she finds out, oh, her friends are interested in helping her. They're
Oh, yeah.
interested in doing
Mhm.
the right thing as they understand it. And so there's a lot of really good give and take in character development, let alone a plot. Like, it's that it's not so much a who done it, but it's that race movie, the buddy movie, right?
Yes.
Where you're
Yes.
okay,
Yes.
we've got a task, and these buddies, for better or for worse, have
Right.
got to go
Yeah.
together, whether they want to be friends or not. I'm thinking of the De Niro Charles Gordon movie where they,
Oh, Midnight Run.
yeah,
Yes.
they got
Yes.
they got to run. I'm going to shoot him myself.
Right. Right.
These two people are thrown together despite the things, and that this book felt a little bit like this to me, is that these people who are just getting to know each other have to trust each other to make a pathway, right, to go
Yes.
through. And I,
Yeah.
I love that about it, Desmond. A little bit about, now that you got two books out in the world, what does your writing process look like? Um,
Right.
what does your writing day look like? And how do you schedule that? How do you tackle that?
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting, the stepping away from advertising and really dedicating the time to do this, because I was kind of running out of time life-wise to get this done. And so in doing it, I kind of write every day. That's like a almost a cliche, but my process is essentially, or has been in this entire time of writing, which I would say, for the last 10 years, looking out for my kids. But one's in college and, barely, I can hardly get her to call me back. And one just got into University of Michigan.
Oh,
So she's going to be Wolverine and gone soon. So I'm kind of not needed. And it's funny. And there's this great quote from Bert Vonnegut where he said, having your kids leave and go to college is like being fired from your best job ever. And I've definitely been fired. So my process essentially is writing, all day long. And what I do is I kind of try to figure out what it is I'm writing, and there's a quote, I forget the writer's name, but she said, the first draft is just the writer telling herself what the story is about. And I totally buy that. But the thing that I do a little bit different than just because I'm not a pantser, I'm
Yeah.
a total plotter. And as I mentioned before, kind of a Jamaican mechanic. And I took the Robert McKee story class 3 times, and
Oh,
that's like a 3 day, 10 hour a day kind of intensive. And I'm also like my copy of the Save the Cat story structure book is completely dog-eared and annotated and everything. So I really do spend a lot of time plotting the story and then getting that first draft based on the plot, on my plotting, I should say. And then I try to let go of the plotting and let, the pantsing happen. But for me, I can't sit there, and especially with a book like, Better Must Come, where there are so many, at least 20 setups and payoffs,
oh yeah,
uh,
yeah,
right? And so many plot twists and, intersecting characters. I don't know how people can sit there and pants that. I think
yeah.
you really have to plot it out, So I sort of get the architecture down and where the payoffs will be. And I think the payoffs are so great, for a reader because the logic is retroactive, right?
Right.
You like find out about something on page 100 and you're like, huh, that's curious. And then on page 210, the payoff comes and you're like, your mind zooms all the way back to page 100 and you're like, aha, that's why that was there.
Yeah, yeah.
And I love that. I love that as a reader and I love seeding it as a writer. So, like I said, after I do all the plotting, then I just sort of let go and do the pantsing part of it where, I try to develop the character more. And
Oh yeah.
then, the last part would be kind of making the writing nice, sort
Oh
of.
yeah. Yeah, yeah. So you've got the edit. So you really, once you've plotted it out, you try to go and write, and now you have the luxury to write every day. So are you really at it 6 to 8 hours, or are you 4 hours and take a walk break? How do you break that up?
It all depends. I just like let it rip because so much of it is sitting here.
Mm-hmm.
I can't tell you how many times, especially over the last 10 years, where I just sit here for hours. I'll sit here for 3 hours and not write anything, but the thinking is writing,
Yeah.
and trying to figure out, okay, so sort of the McKee way of doing something is, opening up the plot, opening up the gap between expectations and results. So if you have like someone, for as an example, I think one he actually used, if someone that borrowed money from a loan shark is at the end of his rope and decides that he doesn't want to live anymore and he walks into the loan shark's sort of lair and he's greeted by his thugs and everything, the expectation is he's going to be beaten up because there's no way to possibly pay that money back. But McKee would say, okay, you now have that moment. Now sort of draw a gap, two brackets
Yeah.
between being beaten up and the person walking into the loan shark's lair and write 10 different things that could happen that are unexpected. And I do a lot of that. I can do it mentally now. I used to have to
Yeah.
write it down, but after all the practice, I can just think it through. And I think of one or two possible ways of going at it, and then I start to write about those and see if like if those can actually work. And if I could get one of them to work, it's like gold,
Yeah.
writing gold. It's like, oh, that's a great twist. People wouldn't expect that. And it also pays off the character's character. So, I do a lot of that where, I can just sit and not write anything or sit and write a sentence. But the way it usually works is I sit and I plot. And so I spend months creating the plot structure, and I'm like, okay, that's good. Okay, now it's time to write. When I sit there and write, I might not come up with anything, but then I'm thinking about it. And I'm sitting
Yeah.
for 3 straight hours, my back hurts, and I'm there. But then the next day I might write a sentence. Then the next day I might write a paragraph. The next day I might go back to not writing anything. But then bingo, one day I wrote 5 pages and
Yeah.
about two of which will be good.
Yeah.
And and then so on. And it just sort of revs itself up as we go along. And that's kind of the way I do it anyway.
That's and I appreciate the mental writing. As an academic,
Mm,
sometimes I would think about something for 2 or 3 days before I would ever have an opening word, but the
right.
article would be shaping in my mind, and I think, okay, who do I need to cite? What do I need? What's
Right.
what's the nugget of this argument, and what resources do I have to support it? With the data that I've collected. So I
Yeah.
appreciate that, but do you try to then edit a chapter as you go along, or do you try to get through it before you go back and refine plot points and character? I mean, you talk about that first draft. I really like that idea of the first draft telling you what you're writing about, right?
Yeah.
Then you go back and do it. But when you're in your second and third draft, are you trying to get a complete run through before you go back and make major changes? Or do you stop along the way?
So I'm very, very fortunate to have a writing community
Mm-hmm.
and of like good writers, and I have my agent, and I have my editor also to talk to. But what I do on the second draft is address the parts that they point out that need work.
Mm-hmm.
And I first go at those. I sort of take everything they say, I write down I sort of notch off the things I agree with, and then I go after those changes first.
Yeah.
And so, sort of like once I've patched up those areas, then I read through the whole thing and see how that flows. Then I feel safe enough. And, it's really key to like really believe that, okay, that's patched up enough for me to go ahead. And my older daughter, who is a better writer than I am, she articulated this really well for me. She said, I really have to believe it, Daddy, before I can write. Because
Yeah.
I'm really on her, like, come on, get it done. I'm Jamaican, right? So
Yeah.
let's get this done, man. Move on, move on. But she's like, I have to believe it first. And it struck me that, you know what? I have to believe it also.
Yeah.
So I kind of, once I believe it, then like you said, I go all the way through it. And then I sit down with that draft, and if I feel comfortable with it, I'll share it. And then once I share that, I get more notes. And then I'll do the patching again in
Yeah.
those parts. And then I'll just go after it and rewrite it because I'll feel like by that point, after all that process, I will have believed it enough to go ahead and get it done enough. And usually at that point, that's when I can like share it with my editor.
Yeah.
And it's funny, because she is so tough and so old school that, when in her eyes, that's the first draft.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. I've talked to a couple writers, and I said, how many drafts? And one of them said, oh, like 30.
Yeah.
You
Oh,
know,
yeah.
yeah,
Easily.
it's like the other thing, again, I keep mentioning this, your characters are rich. So do
Right.
you, when Better Must Come, did you go back and kind of scour through the book looking at where Hammer is and does he fit? And then go
Yes.
back and look through, where's Gabriel and does he fit? Do you read character by character, or you try to do holistic all the time? That would be really hard for me. I mean, I'd almost
Mm,
have to
mm.
say, let me take a look at this for how Hammer works. Let me take a look
Right.
at how, this character
Yeah.
works. How do you deal
Well,
with
so it's funny you say that. So again, I have, the Robert McKee plotting thing sort of, it's sort of in my body at this point. So I feel like I really own that. So that's the holistic part. But then Michelle Hoover at Grub Street at the Novel Incubator had always taught us this thing that I loved. She said, and you had brought this up earlier, where all the minor characters, in order to make them rich, you should give them an intention of what they want to do for the entire story, not just scene by scene, an obstacle and a turn at minimum. So most, your main characters have more points than that. But if your minor characters have that intention, obstacle, and a turn for their overall arc, they kind of become almost main, to make sure the minor characters have at least those 3 points really helps you flesh them out a lot. And then within the scene, I sort of also apply that, and that's more like from David Mamet, and the great American screenwriter,
Yeah.
playwright. I guess he's a screenwriter as well. But he would always talk about that, having certain things within the scene work and keeping the architecture, strong for each particular scene. And what I do is I take Mamet's tenets and I apply them to each scene, not just in each chapter. And,
Yeah.
so I'll write and then I'll go in there and I'm like, Hammer's kind of floating here in a way, right?
Yeah.
He wants something, but there's no obstacle and there's no twist, no turn. So I go back into the scene and I create an obstacle for Hammer, right? And then it could be just a piece of dialogue from Gabriel or someone else or Deja. And then I twist it and have a turn in there for him. That way, so if there's a scene with the two main characters, Gabriel and Deja, they have an intention, an obstacle, a turn, something that moves their character forward, and then an expectation of what's next. But with Hammer, he just have the three things of the intention, obstacle, and turn. So that way, the architecture of the scene is there, and it really keeps things moving, in terms of the story moving forward, and in terms of you knowing a little bit more about the character each time. And it's funny, I remember the first time that the idea of doing that for the whole book was sprung to me was with Michelle Hoover, the teacher I mentioned. And she said, "Well, Des, you're doing pretty well with your rewrite. And you've got the book to about 30%, where 30% of the time you have it seated with the right infrastructure for each scene. That's great. Now you have to think about doing it for the whole book." And I almost fell out of the chair. I was like, "There's no way you can do that for 100% of the book. That's impossible." And I just, I really flipped out, and it took me days to recover from that.
Yeah.
But, I went ahead and tried it and, went on and practiced and kept doing it. And yes, you can do it for 100% of the book. It's just
Yeah.
a lot of work.
Yeah, and it's like, when I'm thinking of some of the writers I know that have been around a long time. Gary D. Schmidt is one, and A.S. King is another, and
Mm,
they're really rigorous about, um, A.S. King. She's really rigorous. Amy's really rigorous about
yeah,
plotting and
right,
following a plot, um, but she's under no illusion that it happens at one pass, right?
right,
And
right.
and Gary was a longtime teacher as well as a writer, so he only had those a couple hours a day. So he said
Wow. Yeah.
what he did was when he wrote, he would try to do 2 or 3 pages, and then he would go the next day. He would look at those 2 pages and the next page and the next
Wow.
page. And then when he got done with a chapter, because he plotted it, right?
Right.
He would leave it alone and then do it with the next chapter, 2 pages,
Ah,
go back and
yeah,
look at the 2 pages. And then when the whole book was done, he'd do a reread. But he said, he's written enough books now that he says, I
right.
kind of know once I have a plot that I can do this. And I thought that was a real instructive way of somebody. Now
Mm,
he's retired and is writing quite a bit more time, but he said, I just had that hour a day where I had to
Right.
make some advance if I was going to be a writer and an academic at the same
Yeah,
time,
yeah. I think
I had to
that's
do
such an
that.
awesome point
Yeah,
because it really takes a lot of the time out of writing when you do sit there and you structure it a little, at least a little bit beforehand.
yeah.
Great point. Yeah.
Yeah, I think those are two models that if I were looking at, I'd look at both of those. But I love talking with Amy. If you ever get a chance to meet A.S. King or Amy, you should talk to her because she'll have paper strung together with the plot. She really puts it all on a like a running sheet of paper that she tapes together and hangs on the wall and everything. And
Yeah, yeah.
it's one of those things where okay,
Wow. I
it's
love it.
to do that. We should pin down Jason sometime. I haven't talked to Jason for a couple of years, but I'd like to know his story about how because he's really prolific now. So,
Oh
but
my goodness.
he's got to have a pattern that works for him pretty well by now.
Yeah, yeah, he must.
I'd love to have that conversation with him. Um, he's fun to talk to as well.
Yeah.
Well, Desmond, it sounds like what's next now? You got these two books out. I think Better Must Come is getting good reviews. I think it's
Yeah.
getting out there
Mhm.
well.
Yeah.
I hope this helps a little bit. I'll tell you
Thank
when
you.
it posts. You can take the interview and link it to whatever you want in your webpage as well. But
Great.
I hope it gets some play. But what's next? You've been fired from your other job. You gave up advertising. The kids are going to go to college, and
Right.
so now what's next?
Well, I have written it's funny, I believe this week my agent is going to take out a middle grade story that again, a lot of plotting,
Yeah.
but it's a story about two kids, brother and sister, who find out they have special powers,
Huh?
and they are dispatched by ancient powers to go back to the 1921 Tulsa massacre to
Oh,
save a bloodline.
oh,
And it's the little brother's first time, and the big sister's, had done a few missions before. And it's sort of this, magical adventure where they interact with history. And it's something that I would love to see as a series,
yeah,
where these two kids are, they're sent back in time, and, they're sent back at these key points where they have to do certain things in order to, make the rescue. And the sort of time travel element in it is pretty new. I won't mention what it is because it's a
yeah,
pretty cool
good.
surprise, but it's a twist on time travel. And the parents are only taken, I mean, sorry, the kids are only taken care of by their grandmother, and the parents are missing somewhere.
Uh,
Uh-huh.
so it
So,
could be an overwhelming line. Yeah, yeah, you could do a
yeah,
lot of things with that. Well, good. I hope it and I hope it goes well that you're
thank you.
doing that. Um, and I hope to run into you again at another conference, or sometimes we should just get together and let
Yeah.
alone that we're working
Yeah, that would be good.
Well, it's great talking with you. I hope that this next book is a success, and let's do everything we can to advertise Better Must Come.
Well, thank you so much. It was a pleasure and great talking to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Desmond.